Where are we
Okay.
this morning? I couldn't remember what verse.
Well, we're in Lamentations, chapter 5. We finally get out of Lamentations today. And of course, you know, I mentioned it every week. Lamentations is kind of a
Now look,
conclusion.
I want you to know it opened up.
It's important then.
Does it say, hey, you need to be here?
Yeah, Lamentations is kind of the conclusion to Jeremiah, if you will. Although this chapter today, as we read it today, you'll see that it was probably written sometime after the rest of the book. So it relays what Jeremiah is feeling from a few different points of view. But today, you know, Lamentations has 5 chapters, so we're at the very end of Lamentations. It started out in a very low period, and then it didn't get much better, but a little bit better in chapter 2. And then chapter 3 was the pinnacle of hope in the book. And then chapter 4, which we did last week, we started back on that downhill thing, you know, realizing that God is doing this because of, you know, what they did and what they didn't do. And so today we hit another low point in the book as it comes to a close, as that period of grief has come to acceptance. But this is going to be pretty short. We're only doing Lamentations 5, and there's 22 verses, and they're only like 2 lines each, so it'll go pretty quick. Let me see about share this screen here. Right there. Share. Okay. So, Peggy, you haven't been with us, but Game of Thrones is what I entitled this Sunday school class, which has been going on for a couple of years. It's been going on a long time. Because we're basically looking at the history of Israel in as chronological an order as we can.
Where's Brian?
Friends in that meeting. But we called it Game of Thrones because we're looking at the history of Israel through 4 different lenses. We're looking through or what I call thrones. Looking through a priestly throne, a prophetic throne, I've already lost my train of thought. Priestly, prophetic, royal, and eternal. So, and when we get, you know, now that we're in the prophets, we understand that the prophetic voice speaks a whole lot more than the others. When we were in the Kings and Chronicles, it was more of a royal, sometimes a priestly, but we're getting definitely a prophetic and an eternal voice as we get deeper into the prophets. As far as chronologically, the northern kingdom, it's been 60 years since they got defeated by the Assyrians, where the southern kingdom has been gone a few years now. Jeremiah was left behind, and him and whoever had been left behind had probably made their way to Egypt, at least that's the tradition, and so that's probably where this last chapter is being written from. So, in Lamentations 5, we take turns typically reading the scripture, which I'll put up on the screen. There we go. So, let me move this out of the way. There we go.
Here comes another one. Thank you.
I don't think that you guys will be able to stand it because we're not talking over a telephone, but I could call in.
Well, you get to see it from this side of the, you get to hear it and see it from this side of the screen this time. So, does anyone want to read? We're going to do this 2 verses at a time. So, if anyone wants to read verse 1 and 2.
Remember, O Lord, what has happened to us. Look and see our disgrace. Our inheritance has been turned over to aliens, our homes to foreigners.
Okay. Yes.
Stop. Yours said disgrace. It says, and see our disgrace.
Yes.
So what I'm reading, it says, and see our reproach. Disgrace and reproach. That puts a different slant to the word here.
It can, depending on which
When I read
translator.
this, I thought to myself, God, don't forget us. And we're now, because you've done all this to us, it's your fault. That to me is a reproach.
Well, Yes.
See
See what we've done wrong, as opposed to see the results of what we've done wrong. So, but yeah, what I want to point to, in the first line in verse 2, it says our inheritance has been turned over to strangers, our home to foreigners. This line speaks very deeply to Jeremiah, because Jeremiah was told by God before the kingdom had fallen, or while it was fallen, God told him to sell his parcel of land to a family member, to purchase a parcel of land from a family member.
Right.
And so Jeremiah did what God said, and then the land was destroyed and taken over by the Babylonians. And now we hear that the land has gone to them, that he doesn't own anymore. However, it becomes a prophetic type of voice here, because when we get further down the line, we're going to find out that when the exile is over, when Cyrus and Darius send the people back to Jerusalem, that parcel of land that Jeremiah owned is going to be where they start building the city again. Because he took it and he buried it in a jar, in a cistern. They're going to go back to the cistern and they're going to dig up that deed. So they're going to follow up on that. So it brings a little chill to me. I hope it's the spirit and not just the temperature. But it brings a chill to me to read things like that, that here he is, he doesn't know what's going to happen 80 years from now, or such, 70 years from now. So, okay, so someone will read 3 and 4.
We must buy water.
Verse 3.
By water, I'm sorry. We have become orphans and fatherless, our mothers like widows. We must buy the water we drink. Our wood can be had only at a price.
Okay. So they have no family to speak of. These are people that were left destitute. We heard last week, y'all didn't, but last week was grim, because we heard of mothers who were eating their dead babies in order to survive.
I wasn't here.
Yeah, it was pretty graphic. So they don't have any fathers, because they've either been killed or exiled. Their mothers are widows for the same purpose. They have to buy the water they drink. So where do they get money to buy these things? Well, our wood can be had only at a price. That can be taken one of two ways. That could be that they're having to find a way to purchase wood, or that's all they have left to barter with, is the wood they have with them. So I don't know about y'all, but if I'm having to cut down trees in order to get enough water to survive, I'm in a pretty bad place.
Especially in the desert.
Especially in a desert. Okay, someone want to go 5 and 6?
I will. Those who pursue us are at our heels. We are exhausted, but are given no rest. We submitted to Egypt and Assyria to get enough food to survive.
Okay. What this is hearkening to, that verse 6, so we submitted to Egypt. Egypt took advantage of the situation. Now, Egypt was one of those who had, I'm going to shut the door here. They're meeting in the choir. Egypt was one that took advantage. They had been one of those groups that had been approached by Israel to help fight the Assyrians. Mm-hmm. And Egypt said, we want no part of that. And so, but Egypt was one of those that was also able to, I won't say withstand the Assyrian invasion, but they were able to repel it in some form or fashion. They ended up not having to be exiled, although they did have a puppet king. So that is what that history is there. But they had to do that in order to get enough bread. So they've sold themselves into slavery. Okay. 7 and 8.
Our fathers sinned and are no more, and we bear their punishment. Slaves rule over us, and there is none to free us from their bands.
Okay.
Hands, excuse me.
Yeah. So verse 7, and this is actually 2 different parts here. Verse 7, they're paying for the sins of their fathers, or the sins of their ancestors. When the covenant was made to Abraham, a little later on in Abraham's life, the covenant was reiterated and expanded upon. It was interpreted a little bit further. And what it had to do with was, remember that I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Well, it got expanded on a little later in Abraham's life. And what it came to was, what the expansion was the blessings will extend to 10 generations, but the curse is only extended to 4. See, God is merciful. But that's what that is referring to. We bear their punishment. So this is probably the 4th generation of that. Well, all the generations sin, but regardless. And then verse 8, slaves rule over us. Now, think about that. If you are so low that even the slaves of the people who subjected you are in control of you. The only thing that really comes even close to that is the caste system in India with the unapproachables, the unmentionables. Those that are so low in society that even the lowest paid workers that the unmentionables can have to submit themselves to even the lowest paid workers. So, verse 9 and 10.
I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
We get our bread at the risk of our lives because of the sword in the desert. Our skin is hot as an oven, feverish from hunger.
Okay, that the end of verse 9, sword in the desert. Again, Luke and Ann weren't here last week, but well, I guess several people were. But anybody know what the sword in the desert is?
Sword in the desert.
We heard it last week. The sword in the desert is actually Edom, the descendants of Esau, the other Arab nations that still exist as tribes in the desert.
Okay.
So that's the sword in the desert.
Okay.
And you see their skin is hot. Of course, that's probably from the desert heat as well. But it says fevers from hunger. They are they're so malnourished that that their bodies just cannot handle, and probably their skin is festering. Their internal organs are starting to fail. So
Mine says the famine has blackened our skin as though baked in an oven.
that's
How does
similar.
that blacken, starving blacken your skin?
Well, they have no food, but they're out in the desert. They have
So it's
their
summer.
houses have been destroyed. They're burning under the heat. There's no shade, no nothing. Okay. 11 and 12.
Paul, you want to read?
No, I'm sorry, I have trouble seeing the dark stuff.
I'll do it. Women have been ravished in Zion, and virgins in the town of Judah. Princes have been hung up by their hands. Elders are shown no respect.
Okay. Women have been violated, of course, and virgins in the town of Judah. Of course, this they're pretty much being raped, pillaged. They're because they can't fight back. They have no strength physically, but they also have no strength emotionally. Princes have been hung up by their hands. Now that, although in this context they're being literal, but it does have kind of a prophetic tone to it. Jesus was nailed up by his hands. And what happens is when they're hung up, Jesus basically died of suffocation because he couldn't pull, eventually his body just gave out. He could not pull himself up in order to keep the fluid from building up on his lungs.
Yeah.
And so he suffocated to death. And so by being held up by your hands, it doesn't say anything about their feet here. So they're, in order to try to keep breathing, they have to pull themselves up by their hands. And eventually their arms are just going to give out. Elders have shown no respect, of course. The elders are probably in worse shape than even the younger ones because their bodies are giving out even quicker. 13 and 14.
Young men toil at the milestones, boys labor under loads of wood. The elders are gone from the city gate. The young men have stopped their music.
This one's pretty self-explanatory. Don't have to go a whole lot of that. Although, millstone, that kind of brings back an image of who? Anybody remember a famous Jew that got put to work under a millstone? Samson.
Yeah.
His eyes were popped out, and he was put to work at a millstone.
Samson?
Samson. Mhm.
Okay.
Elders are gone from the city gate. Now, why is that important?
That's what it used to be, right?
The city gate was probably, besides the temple and maybe the palace, the city gate was the most popular place. That was where the phrase coming and going.
So are there
Looks
any,
to that.
are there any elders left?
Well, it seems to imply that. It seems to imply that, but the city's been destroyed. Of course, part of this is the city gate doesn't exist anymore because the city's gone. So, young men have stopped their music. Of course, that, and we take that at a literal pace there. Okay, 15 and 16.
Joy has left our hearts. Our dancing has turned to mourning. The garlands have fallen from our heads. Weep for us because we have sinned.
Now you're sent garlands, this says crown. So how do, using that image, what do you think the people of Judah thought of themselves?
Well, they thought they were pretty highfalutin.
Right. They took God's statement that they were the chosen, and they let it get to their heads. So, of course, that was eventually the whole nation of Israel's downfall was pride. They placed themselves above God. But there's that woe to us, for we have sinned. So they recognize that placing themselves in that prideful place was sin.
So we're 2 generations away though from going to, where'd they go to?
Well,
Babylon.
no, at this point, they're already gone. The big people are already gone.
They're
But
2 generations away. I mean,
they're 2 generations away from
we
coming
got
back.
new people living here.
Correct.
Okay, we got new people living here.
17 and 18.
Because of this, our hearts are faint. Because of these things, our hearts grow dim. For Mount Zion, which lies desolate, with jackals prowling over it.
Anybody else have something different on 18? Is it jackals for all y'all translated?
Mine is.
Okay. This is going from that acceptance stage to that giving up stage, which is sad. They have no more fight in them, not even for their own lives. Okay, 19 and 20.
You, O Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation. Why do you always forget us? Why do you forsake us so long?
Wow, what happened from the last verse to this, to verse 19?
Yeah.
If you notice in your Bibles, there's probably a break between verse 18 and verse 19.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a reason for that. They believe that this was an add-on several years after the rest of it was written.
Trying to get back in good faith.
Well, but it goes right back to the rest of it. But this prophet leaves us with this sense of hope. He's asking the questions that all the prophets have asked. Why do you forget us? Why do you forsake us for so long? And of course, why, especially when it pertains to God, why is one of the most difficult questions to answer.
So your sentences, your punishment is too severe. He's telling God.
Well,
Well,
it's where are you, God? Well, you
Why
told
so
us you
long?
would be with us.
Why so long?
Right, why so long? So, and then who wants to read the final 2?
I'll do it. Restore us to yourself, O Lord, and we may return. We may return. Renew our days of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure.
Hmm.
Well,
Okay, so he makes this plea, their final plea, restore us, that we may return, renew us as, renew our days as of old. He's not talking about, bring us back to where we were, just before all this happened. He's wanting, this is an indication, they want to go back to a time when God, you were present, we followed your laws, we followed the priests, we did what was acceptable in your eyes. This ain't just, God,
We're over.
let this end,
we're over with being the chosen
Right.
one. We're over that now.
Unless you just completely rejected us. Well, God keeps his promise, and either Jeremiah or whoever wrote this last section knows that promise. I will never leave you, or I will always be with you. God doesn't break promises. So this is not so much a challenge as it is a reminder to God. Remember, God, you told us this? God's okay with that. Because God don't forget. And in fact, I think it pleases God to know that we remembered.
Mhm.
And to voice that remembrance to God. So that's it for Lamentations. I don't have our plan for next week just yet. I'm having to deal with some issues at home, which will eventually come out, but some legal issues. So, but don't worry, it's nothing. You don't have to worry. Just I've had to focus on that instead of
Okay.
other stuff. So, but I will email everyone. I will email everyone with the passage we're going to be in next week.
Don't put it in your draft folder and forget it.
Be sure to punch
How many
send.
times has
Punch
that happened?
send.
Twice, 3 times? Okay. Anybody have any questions about Lamentations?
But not so much about Lamentations, but reading this. This is a people that are utterly, totally, completely defeated.
But we have people in our world now that are
Utterly, completely defeated. Yeah.
They're right. They've reached the point that they reach that point of acceptance. Okay, this is just always how it's going to be, and that eventually leads to that point that we read there at the end of complete just.
So that's the way the world was at
Yeah.
that time. They put people down and they left them forever. We thought it was long punishment, 70, 80
The other
years.
thing that strikes me here is that the elders are gone. And from the historical picture of things, so many of these elders went with what the kings wanted and what the rulers wanted. They didn't stick with what they were supposed to do.
Or they were killed.
Or killed off.
If they refused.
Like one or the other. And of course, as an utterly defeated people, if you were any kind of person in power, you're gone now.
Hmm.
So
they're
in deep trouble.
Keep in mind, Babylon was a very powerful nation. They had a plan, and they had set this plan in motion years before they attacked Israel. Remember, they took the kids about 6 years prior to the events of utterly destroying Jerusalem. That's where we get Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They took the kids to indoctrinate them into Babylonian ways. That way, when the people were brought there, their own kids would lead them in Babylonian ways. Of course, God had a plan that the Babylonians didn't know about. So
I think we have a hard time understanding of that, how horrible it was. We think if we have our own kind of milk, it's horrible. That was horrible times that we can't taking the kids and putting them in a new nation.
mm-hmm.
We had in the 20th century, we had a comparative thing with Nazi Germany.
Oh,
When I
boy,
look
did
at
we
it,
ever.
and Nazi Germany was totally decimated completely. And two things happened. When it was broken on the western side of things, we went with the Marshall Plan to help them rebuild. But on the Russian side, nothing. And in 65, when we went into Eastern Germany, you could still see buildings that were still bombed out. Or even in Poland, there were buildings that we saw that had never been repaired after World War II. And we're talking now, 45 to 80s, to 1980s and 20s. long time.
So soon as World War II was over, Russia was the enemy.
Yeah, Russia became.
They're gobbling up all the.
And they believe in two
They're the
things: punishment, which is what you see here in Spear West, and then on the western side we had, well, we better rebuild them or else there'll be real problems.
Right,
The
So,
Marshall Plan was wonderful.
yes.
and this is the standard conflict even today in what's going on in various places.
So Mike, I enjoyed it, that's all I got to say.
We're glad you're back. We missed you last week.
Great session. Short but great.
So, any other questions? Bye-bye, Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Y'all have a wonderful day.
Okay. Wonderful day. You can